There are some things a man carries in secret, believing that silence is the same as safety. That if nobody says it out loud, it isn't really real. Before we go any further, if you believe that loyalty is the foundation of any real family, hit that like button right now and subscribe. Because what happened on the Family Feud stage on one ordinary Thursday afternoon was anything but ordinary. It was the moment a secret that had been buried for 2 years walked out into the brightest studio lights in television, and a wife stood tall while the man beside her had nowhere left to hide. Steve Harvey had built his career on reading people. After more than a decade behind that Family Feud podium, he had seen families laugh together, argue together, embarrass each other, and lift each other up. He thought he had seen every version of what a family could be in front of a camera. He had not seen this. When Denise Coleman walked out onto that stage on a bright September afternoon in 2021, she looked like any other contestant. She smiled at the audience. She waved. She stood beside her husband, Marcus, and her 2 adult children and looked every bit the picture of a close, loving family ready to have the time of their lives. But Denise Coleman was not there to play a game. She was there because she had made a decision, quiet, deliberate, and absolute, that the truth was going to come out one way or another. And if it was going to come out, it was going to come out on her terms. Denise Coleman was 49 years old, and she had spent the last 23 of them being what the world would call a good wife. She had grown up in Columbia, South Carolina, the youngest of 4 sisters in a household where her mother worked 2 jobs and her father worked one, and somehow they still always came up a little short. She had learned early that life did not make promises. You worked for what you needed, and you held tight to what you loved. She had met Marcus Coleman at a church picnic when she was 25. He was charming in the way that some men are charming, easily, naturally, as if it required no effort at all. He had a wide smile and a warm handshake and the kind of confidence that makes a young woman feel like the most important person in a room. They had dated for 2 years and married on a Saturday in June. Her mother had cried through the whole ceremony. Marcus worked in logistics management, a steady, respectable career that kept him traveling 3 weeks out of every 4. Denise had accepted this early in their marriage, the same way she accepted most things. Practically without complaint, with her eyes fixed on the life they were building rather than the inconveniences along the way. She had raised their 2 children, Jalen, now 24, and Brianna, now 21, largely on her own during those long weeks when Marcus was away. She had gone back to school at 38 to finish a nursing degree she had put aside when Jalen was born, and for the past 9 years she had worked in the pediatric ward of a hospital in Charlotte, North Carolina. She was, by every measure that most people use to measure these things, a woman who had done everything right. Marcus Coleman was 52, and the truth about Marcus Coleman was that he had been living 2 lives for the better part of 2 years. Denise had found out 8 months before the Family Feud taping, not through a dramatic confrontation, not through a confession, but through the quiet, methodical discovery of a woman who had noticed too many small things adding up to one very large thing she was not supposed to see. A hotel receipt for a city he had not mentioned visiting. A name that appeared 3 times in a phone bill. A weekend business trip that his colleague, called by accident, knew nothing about. When she confronted him, Marcus had done what men in his position often do. He minimized. He explained. He wept. He promised. He said it was over. He said it had meant nothing. He said he had never stopped loving her and that he would spend the rest of his life proving it. Denise had listened to all of it, and then she had gone very quiet, the kind of quiet that is not peace but its opposite. The kind that comes when a person has stopped arguing because they have already decided. It was Brianna who had applied to Family Feud months before any of this had come to light. The producers had called back at what turned out to be a very particular moment in the Coleman household. Denise had agreed to appear. She had not told anyone why. From the moment the Coleman family walked out onto the Family Feud stage, something felt slightly off-kilter, though nobody in the audience could have said exactly what it was. They looked like a family. They moved like a family. Marcus put his arm around Denise and she let him, her smile steady, her eyes forward. Steve Harvey greeted them with his usual warmth, cracking a joke about the family's matching blue shirts that got a big laugh from the crowd. Marcus laughed loudest. Denise smiled with her mouth. The Coleman family was competing against the Torres family from Dallas, 5 cousins who were loud and fast, and clearly having the time of their lives. The first round went well for the Colemans. Marcus stepped up and buzzed in first, landing a strong answer. The audience cheered. Marcus pumped his fist. He looked back at Denise and winked. She held his gaze for exactly 1 second, then she looked away. The second round, Steve pulled Denise aside from the group for a pregame conversation, the kind of casual, warm exchange he did with different family members to loosen them up for the cameras. He asked her how long she and Marcus had been married. She said 23 years. Steve whistled, impressed. He asked what the secret was. Denise paused, just for a beat, barely long enough to notice. Then she said very clearly, honesty. I think honesty is everything in a marriage. You cannot build anything real on a lie. The audience applauded. It was a good answer, a crowd-pleasing answer. Steve nodded and moved on, but Marcus, standing 10 feet away, had heard every word. And something moved across his face that the camera caught, and that the edit team would later decide to keep in the final cut. A flicker of something that was not quite a smile and not quite a flinch. Something in between. The game continued. Round 3 brought a question that felt, in retrospect, almost too on the nose. Name something a person hides from their spouse. The audience laughed at the question the way audiences laugh at things that are funny because they are also uncomfortably true. Marcus stepped to the buzzer. He buzzed in fast. His answer was money. It was on the board, number 3, 18 points. He turned back to his family, looking pleased with himself. Then Steve turned to Denise. Denise, same question. Name something a person hides from their spouse. And Denise Coleman looked directly at her husband, not at Steve Harvey, not at the board, at Marcus, and she said without blinking, an affair. The studio went completely, absolutely still. Not the pause of a room waiting for a punchline. The pause of a room that has just understood that something real is happening, something that was not in the script, was not planned, was not a bit. The kind of stillness that falls when the air in a place changes and everyone feels it at once. Steve Harvey turned to look at the board. The board revealed the answer. Number 1, 44 points. But nobody in that room was looking at the board. Jalen, standing beside his father, had gone rigid. Brianna had brought one hand slowly to her mouth. And Marcus Coleman, the man with the wide smile and the warm handshake and the confidence that once filled every room, stood perfectly still, the color draining from his face in full view of 200 people and a national television camera. Steve Harvey turned back to the family. He was not laughing. The audience was not laughing. The room had crossed some invisible line into somewhere else entirely, and everyone present felt the weight of it. Denise, Steve said quietly, do you want to talk about that? Denise turned to face him. Her hands were folded in front of her. Her posture was perfect. Her voice, when she spoke, was completely steady, the voice of a woman who had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in the silence of her own house, and who was finally done rehearsing. Yes, she said, I think I do. What happened next would be described in the weeks and months following the episode's airing as one of the most quietly powerful moments in the history of daytime television. Not because of shouting, not because of chaos, but because of the precise, devastating calm of a woman who had decided to stop pretending. Denise told Steve, told the studio, told America that she had discovered her husband's affair 8 months ago, that she had confronted him, that he had promised it was over, that she had spent 8 months watching him come home for dinner and sit at their table and tell their children he loved their family, and she had spent every one of those nights wondering what the truth actually was and whether she was living inside it or outside it. She said she had come on Family Feud because Brianna had wanted them too, because part of her had hoped that being here in this bright, ordinary place, doing this normal, happy thing together, might remind her of something she was afraid she had lost. And part of her, the part that had been carrying this weight alone for 8 months, had simply needed to put it down somewhere, even here, especially here. I am not angry, she said, and her voice remained as steady as stone. I am tired, and I think it is time for my husband to say something true in front of people who are watching, because I have been the only one who knows the truth for a very long time, and I am done being alone in it. Steve Harvey stood beside her for a moment without speaking. He had the microphone at his side. He was not performing, he was thinking. Then he turned to Marcus Coleman. Marcus opened his mouth. He started to speak some version of the words he had used 8 months ago, the ones about love, the ones about mistakes, the ones about it being over. Steve held up one hand, not aggressively, with finality. Sir, Steve said, I'm going to need you to stop right there. The audience, which had been holding its collective breath, made a sound, not quite a gasp, not quite a murmur, something in between. Steve looked at Marcus for a long moment. Then he said something that nobody in the room had expected, not the producers, not the audience, not Marcus, and not even Denise. I'm going to ask you to step off the stage. Marcus blinked. I what? Step off the stage, Steve said again, his voice quiet and immovable. Not because I'm punishing you, but because this woman has been standing beside you for 23 years, and right now, in this moment, she needs to stand somewhere that is just hers. You understand what I'm saying to you? A long pause. Marcus looked at Denise. Denise did not look back. Marcus stepped off the stage. The audience exhaled, a sound like something releasing that had been held too tight for too long. Steve turned back to Denise and to Jalen and Brianna standing on either side of her. He looked at the three of them for a moment, this woman and her two children standing together without him now, and he said something that would be replayed and quoted and shared more than anything else from that afternoon. A family is not built by the person who leaves the room. It is built by the ones who stay in it. And you three, you have been staying. Brianna broke first. She put her arms around her mother and held on. Jalen stepped in from the other side. And Denise Coleman, who had held herself together through 8 months of private grief, and this entire taping and the walkout and the confession and the whole impossible weight of what it means to be the one who knows the truth, put her arms around both of her children and finally, at last, let herself cry. The audience did not applaud. They sat in the kind of respectful silence that is its own form of witness. Some of them were crying too. Steve Harvey said nothing. He simply stood nearby and let the moment be what it was. The Coleman episode aired 6 weeks later on a Tuesday evening. Within 4 hours, the clip of Denise's answer, "An affair," had been viewed 11 million times. By the following morning, it was the top trending topic on 3 separate social media platforms. Within 48 hours, it had been covered by every major entertainment outlet in the country and several international ones. But the response that defined the episode's legacy was not from critics or journalists or television analysts. It was from ordinary people. Women who had been in Denise's position wrote in their thousands. Women who had discovered something they were not supposed to know and spent months or years carrying that knowledge alone, maintaining the surface of a life that had fractured beneath them. Women who had smiled at dinner tables and school events and family gatherings while something inside them quietly broke. They recognized Denise's steadiness, that particular exhausting composure of a person who has been holding it together for too long. They recognized it because they had lived it. "I watched that clip 7 times, one woman wrote on the show's Facebook page. "Because every time I watched it, I felt less alone. She said what I couldn't say. She stood where I couldn't stand. And Steve Harvey did what I needed someone in my life to do. He made room for her truth." Surprised many viewers was not the exposure itself. It was Steve Harvey's response. His decision to ask Marcus to step off the stage was not something that had ever happened on Family Feud before. It was improvised, unscripted, and entirely human. In a later interview, Steve explained that he had not made a calculated decision in that moment. He had simply felt, with the clarity that sometimes comes when something is undeniably right, that the stage needed to belong to Denise. That she had shared it long enough with someone who had not been honest with her, and that for 5 minutes on a Tuesday afternoon she deserved to stand somewhere that was fully, completely hers. "I've interviewed thousands of families," he said, "and every now and then you meet someone whose dignity it hits you. Denise Coleman had more dignity in that moment than most people have in a lifetime. I wasn't going to let the show just move on from that. Some moments are bigger than the show." Marcus Coleman did not appear in any interviews following the episode. A statement released through his attorney said that he was focused on his family and asking for privacy. The couple separated 3 months after the taping. Their divorce was finalized the following year. But the story of the Coleman family did not end with a divorce decree. In many ways, it was where it truly began. In the months following the episode, Denise was contacted by a nonprofit organization that provided legal and emotional support resources to women navigating marriage dissolution. She began volunteering with them, first on weekends, then more regularly. She found, to her own surprise, that the thing she had been most afraid of, being seen in her most vulnerable moment by millions of strangers, had become a kind of freedom. She had put down something she could not have put down alone, and it had not destroyed her, it had clarified her. "I went on that show carrying something that was crushing me," she said in an interview published the following spring. "And I came off that stage lighter than I had felt in years, not because everything was fixed. Nothing was fixed, but because it was finally real. And real things, even hard ones, are something you can actually work with." Brianna Coleman spoke publicly about the experience for the first time on a podcast dedicated to adult children of divorce. She said that what the episode had given her was something she had not known she was missing, proof that her mother's pain was not invisible. That someone, a lot of someones, as it turned out, had seen it and called it what it was. "My mom spent a year making sure we were okay," Brianna said. "She never once let me see how much she was not okay. And I think part of me needed to see that she was struggling too, that she was human too, so I could stop feeling guilty for my own grief. We cried together that night for the first time. Really cried. It was the first honest conversation our whole family had had in years." Jalen, the quieter of the 2 siblings, said simply that he was proud of his mother. He said she was the strongest person he had ever known, and that the difference between strength and hardness was that strength eventually lets you feel things and hardness just keeps you numb. He said watching his mother cry on that stage, surrounded by her children, held up by them the way she had always held them, was the first time in his life he had understood what it meant to truly have someone. The episode became a touchstone in conversations about emotional honesty in long-term marriages, about the particular burden carried by partners who discover infidelity and choose, for any number of reasons, to absorb that knowledge alone. Therapists cited it. Relationship educators showed it in workshops. A chapter of a book about modern marriage referenced Denise's words directly. "I am tired, and I think it is time for my husband to say something true in front of people who are watching." Those words became something more than a sentence spoken on a game show. They became a shorthand for a specific kind of exhaustion that millions of people recognized, the exhaustion of being the only keeper of a truth that belonged to two people. Steve Harvey, who had by then seen the clip discussed and analyzed in more context than he could count, was asked in an interview what he would say to Denise Coleman if he could say one more thing to her. He thought about it for a moment. Then he said, "I would tell her that she already knew what she needed to know. She knew before she walked onto that stage. She knew the answer before she was ever asked the question. All she needed was the moment, and I'm glad she took it." 2 years after the taping, Denise Coleman received her certification as a family support counselor. She added it to her nursing work, seeing patients at the hospital 4 days a week and spending the fifth at the nonprofit where she had started volunteering. She had a small office with a plant on the windowsill and a framed piece of paper on the wall that said, in her own handwriting, "Honesty is everything. Real things, even hard ones, are something you can work with." She had written it the morning after the episode aired, when she woke up and realized that the world had not ended, that she was still standing, and that for the first time in 8 months she had slept through the night. The lesson embedded in Denise Coleman's story is not a comfortable one. It does not resolve cleanly. It does not promise that telling the truth will be painless or that doing the right thing will protect you from grief. What it promises, what Denise's story bears out with quiet, unflinching clarity, is that the truth, once spoken, gives you something back that silence slowly takes. It gives you back yourself. And sometimes, on a stage in front of 200 people and a man who has spent a long time looking away, that is the most powerful thing in the room. If Denise's story moved you, if it reminded you of someone you love or something you've carried in silence, share this video. And if you're not subscribed yet, please do it now. These are the stories that stay with you, and we'll keep telling them as long as you're here.